recording in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined, as always, by the BS Express himself, Benny Scala. Benny, how you doing today?
Dan, to quote the iconic rock band Emerson, Lake and Palmer, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. And to those of you who are concerned about my dating life, I did meet a very nice woman who's a baker. Now, she can't make coconut custard, but she sure can make my banana cream. Back to you, Dan.
Oh, no. Is that another...
Soupy Sales.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, tonight, the topic is this. We're going to talk about the status of the business, the state of the business, kind of a state of wrestling. So for that, we went to our favorite wrestling fan. He's the Angry Wrestling Fan. He's an award-winning filmmaker, friend of the show, Mike Messier. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys, and thanks to Dan Sebastiano and Benny Scala. Benny's been very supportive of subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, and that is the actual name of the channel, where you'll see Pro Wrestling Rants, AEW clips. I've got a very popular video from the Artifacts room at the AEW fan convention, but you'll also see a lot of Pro Wrestling Rants and a lot of WWE rants over the last 3 or 4 years. So for pro wrestling fans, you're welcome to come over to subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel and see what I'm up to.
Well, as a fan of the product, there's been a lot to rant about recently, and that's going to be the topic of tonight, where wrestling is. There's been a lot of news. We're recording this on a Tuesday. It's June 8th. In the last just 10 days or so, there's been a lot to unpack. I know, Benny, you had said you had some numbers you wanted to start, so what do you got? What are you thinking?
Well, my first question is a long-winded and loaded question. It's kind of like the baked potato at Applebee's. It's fully loaded.
One question in 47 parts.
Well, no, actually, it's in one, but it's a pretty long-winded question. So, Mikey, you had mentioned that John Laurinaitis had released a text last week saying that the WWE released Braun Strowman, Aleister Black, Buddy Murphy, Lana, Santana Garrett, Ruby Riott due to quote-unquote budget cuts. So I happen to be a budget professional. I've worked with budgets most of my adult life. I've done private, I've done not-for-profits. And my perception of a budget cut is, I'll give you an example. Mom and pop grocery store, they're not making enough money to pay the bills. So they got to lay off the delivery guy. And then mom and pop are going to do the deliveries themselves, to make up for it. And when I worked for Pasco County government in 2009 as a budget analyst, at that time that we were going through a recession, the tax revenues weren't enough to pay the bills for the government, the payroll and all the other expenses. So they had to scale back on certain things. They actually laid off employees for the first time in years and years. They had to cut back services. They closed parks. They cut library hours. To me, those are budget cuts. And I don't know if you can see in my background, I have some WWE financials as far as their revenue, but the numbers I found for 2020. So this isn't a year of global pandemic when they pretty much ran no house shows, right?
Right.
Net income, $132 million for the year. Shareholder equity, $389 million. Cash on hand, so cash in the bank, $593 million. So over $500,000 cash in the bank. So, Mikey, my question is, I'm thinking that if Vincent LaGuardia Gambini had seen John Laurinaitis' text, the words out of his mouth would have been, everything that guy just said is bullshit. Thank you. So if John Laurinaitis had to swallow some truth serum, what would that text really have said? What was the real reason why they got rid of these people?
I would think that it would be something to the effect of, we're taking options to sell our company. We haven't committed to any of those options as of now. But in order to further enhance and strengthen our records, our books, and be even more profoundly in the black, we want to cut employees that we feel are being overpaid or underused or both. And we are going to maximize every cent, every dime, every dollar, and every millions of dollars we can. And some of this apparently has been attributed to the rise of a gentleman, I believe his name is Kevin Khan, no relation to Tony Khan over at All Elite Wrestling. And Kevin Khan, who's come into power with the WWE, apparently does not have the personal relationships with some of these wrestlers. Apparently, Vince McMahon has a strong liking for Braun Strowman, who I think most would agree was the biggest name cut last week. And Vince's personal interactions or personal fondness for Braun would have kept Braun on the payroll, presumably, if Vince was making the final decision. But since they've elevated this Kevin Conn gentleman to a higher position and now he makes that call, Kevin Conn didn't see the upside of keeping Braun Strowman to $1 million plus downside contract, so Braun was cut. And unfortunately for Braun Strowman, as far as we can tell, and I don't have all these records at my fingertips, the WWE records I'm talking about, Braun Strowman did not have a do not cut clause in his contract. So essentially, he's got a contract that's a contract good for the WWE, good for him if everything stays the same and goes as planned. But when, quote, things happen, end quote, that's when you get cut. And unfortunately for Braun, some of his words on Twitter a year and a half ago or so about kind of, I'll never put my boots on for another wrestling company to advance. Some of his, brash words are now biting him in the butt in the world of social media engagement, which may or may not matter to him. I have a feeling it doesn't matter to him. So I don't know if I answered your question, Benny. I tried.
No, you did perfectly. I guess my follow-up is because I was going to ask that as another question. How does he do damage control? Because he's not going to quit. Where does he go, and how does he explain it after he came out with that? It wasn't that long ago, right? About a year ago?
Yeah, it was about a year ago. Braun was kind of, and look, here's the thing, guys. I have done videos where I claim, based on the information I've been given, that some of these WWE social media tweets that are controversial are not the actual wrestlers. They're college interns that are hired at a low rate by WWE to stir the pot, to keep fans engaged. So sometimes we see these social media interactions with pro wrestlers, whether 3 or 4 years ago, the big thing was Becky Lynch's Twitter game was so awesome. It might have been her. It might have been a college intern. And Kurt Angle was tweeting things that were obviously not written by Kurt Angle, and I've pointed those out on Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. My point in saying all that is to say this. First of all, I'm not convinced it was actually Braun Strowman making that statement. It could have been. It might not have been. Who knows? Second of all, he doesn't have to explain it. He's a professional wrestler. He's not the Pope. He's not the president. Braun Strowman owes nothing to the smart marks out there who are going to complain if he goes to wrestle for AEW, which is my prediction, or if he goes to anywhere else. And he's a young guy at 37, and 37 is like 27, in this day and age for athletes, right, with all the protein powders and all the wonderful things you can do to keep the nutrition. Thank you. I really just, my prediction, I made a video, I think just yesterday afternoon. It's not Babe Ruth pointing his finger in the air. I'm predicting Braun Strowman works out a deal with AEW, and you see him exchanging glances with Lance Archer, and then Zeus-like forearm smashes to the trapezius, him and Lance Archer, and then he disposes of Lance, and then he goes on to feud with Miro for the TNT title, and then, somebody's going to defend the honor of AEW, and who better but Cody Rhodes? Cody Rhodes versus the big bad Braun, and I mean, I think Braun's going to get a fast ticket to his own, section of the main event scene at AEW, and to me, that's inevitable. I really don't think he's a guy that's going to go to Japan and wrestle strong style. I'm not sure the state of pro wrestling in Japan right now, to be honest with you. I don't see him going to Impact Wrestling. It's too small. I don't MLW. I mean, if they really wanted to get every dollar they had for one talent, MLW could be an option. They could build a company around Braun Strowman if they tried. But I think that Braun Strowman kind of fits into that niche of, if you're already a pro wrestling fan, Braun Strowman's someone you're going to want to see. If you're not a pro wrestling fan, he's not Hulk Hogan in 1983. He's not The Rock in 2000. You know what I mean? He's a pro wrestling fan's wrestler, but I don't think he transcends to that ultra fine, glorified air of The Rock or the Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin even. So my prediction, Braun Strowman AEW by the end of the year.
I could see that. If I can just interject for just a second, you were on such a roll, I didn't want to stop you. But the WWE president is Nick His name's Nick Khan.
Not Kevin?
Kevin. No.
Who am I thinking of? Was there a Kevin Khan back in the day, or am I thinking of Kevin Kelly, the old
You
announcer?
might be thinking of Kevin Dunn.
Right.
Old Keith himself. His name comes up. But actually, speaking of excuse me, Steve, speaking of Nick Khan, the unique thing about him is he was hired in August of last year is when they announced that they were bringing him in as president and chief revenue officer, which that is the big thing, is they brought in a new high-paid chief revenue officer and president in the midst of a pandemic when you were already purging. You were purging wrestlers. You were purging, because you remember that was the summer when they laid off like Zack Ryder and some of those guys. And you're purging talent. You're purging office staff. You're cutting all kinds of expenses, and you bring in a high-paid president and financial officer. And interesting enough, we were talking about stories before we went on the air. I mentioned how there's a lot of news that has come out in recent weeks and whatnot. And one of the things that I mentioned before we started recording that I think is important is when Nick Khan was brought in, one of the first things that was reported, and this was places like Rolling Stone and some of the major, I don't want to say, no offense to our friends at the Dirt Sheets, but actual big news sources versus like, Pro Wrestling and Ringside News and stuff like that, is you don't hire somebody like that unless you're going to restructure your finances and then sell your company. And just let me get the exact date here. It was May 28th. It was reported, or excuse me, May 19th, May 19th, excuse me. It was reported that he had just bought a $7.6 million mansion in Los Angeles.
In 2021.
So, correct. This was not but a month ago, and a couple weeks, excuse me. And so you bring a guy in, high paid president, restructure your finances. You purge talent. They just 2-3 weeks ago, they laid off a large percentage of their corporate office staff and their internet staff and their net staff. Probably some of the interns that Mikey was talking about with the tweets.
Right.
And you're Benny, correct me if I'm wrong. As a man, you've dealt with finances. I've done more than enough budgets in my day. You now have the smallest staff you've had in years. You have the least amount of total control because you've got Fox has say over SmackDown. Your pay-per-views are streaming on Peacock, so NBC runs your pay-per-view network. You're taking all this responsibility out of Vince's hands, out of the main hands. You hire somebody to run your company for you. You purge, you set up. I've seen this before, and they're getting ready to sell a company, perhaps to a major network. And a week ago, not even 2 weeks ago, the president of your company moves to California, moves to Los Angeles in the corner of Hollywood. So maybe the story, and Mikey, I'm going to bounce this to you because the biggest front runner, especially with the Peacock deal, and this is entirely speculation, is NBC Universal. I'm wondering what your thoughts would be about the WWE being purchased by a television network and not, say, a person. Would the WWE become just another television show? Would they completely abandon wrestling and just become like an action TV series? Or do you think they would do kind of like Turner did with WCW, where they would be owned by a network but still kind of try and run themselves as a wrestling company?
That's a great question, and let's just precursor this by saying this is all opinions, no facts, at least on my end, and so I would just say that I think it's this, for the end result for the wrestling fan, this could be the best thing or the worst thing. And I would say that on a technical level, you being WWE, or if they're purchased by NBC, they have two options to start with, and then many other under options underneath that. But the two options are, we just catalog the existing content. Everything from the WWE, the Attitude Era, the Bob Backlund era, the Hulk Hogan era. And then the other option, and also the WCW, World Class Championship Wrestling, UWF, AWA, all the territories, if they got Memphis and stuff like that, all the territories that the WWE catalog consists of, they could just literally just go into library mode. We're going to repackage and redesign and have all this wrestling product content on our network for eternity. So they could just do that. Now, the second question is, do they take the company, the Drew McIntyres, the Bobby Lashleys, the New Days? Alexa Bliss has still got 15, 20, 25 years of being a big star. She's very entertaining. And there's a lot of entertaining people. Bray Wyatt's very entertaining. People that, although the WWE ratings have suffered, you still have some really good commodities there, meaning the actual talent. And do you continue with some form of current wrestling product? So that's the choice. You just catalog it, or you move forward with current stuff moving forward. The second option obviously is a bit more interesting, because then you get into things like, could you do, and I think if I were in charge, which I'm obviously not, I would be tempted to just make a city our home base. Orlando, Florida, Full Sail University. We've got our own venue. They've been renting these venues, the Amway Center and all these other things. Folks, there are plenty of 20,000 seat arenas that the WWE could snap their fingers and buy, or Peacock could just buy one of these 20,000 seat arenas, or a 5,000 seat arena, or a 10,000 seat arena. They could buy some of these arenas that, maybe an NBA franchise or an NHL franchise used but left at some point. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about sports arenas that are no longer being used, and some of them are just sitting there. Yeah. WWE could swoop in. They could make that a home venue. They could put a Hall of Fame in one of those venues. One of these lounges. Like if you ever go to a sports arena, 20,000 seat sports arena, and there's a restaurant, right? They could take one of these restaurants and make it their Hall of Fame room. It doesn't have to be the biggest or the greatest, but you could make something where there's a restaurant, and you can literally have your home base for WWE in Orlando, Florida, or in Las Vegas, Nevada, or in upstate New York, Chicago, anywhere. And you can make it that, hey, if you're a WWE fan and you want to see SummerSlam, or if you want to see WrestleMania, or you want to see any of our pay-per-views, or anything that we do, a SmackDown, a Raw, or make a week of it and come to 3 or 4 events, you've got to come to us. And I think that type of radical change is something that a guy like Vince McMahon Jr., it may not have occurred to him because of the tradition that's steeped into his system of, we're going to the Capitol Center on June 15th. We're going to the Philadelphia Spectrum on June 16th. Then we're up in New York for MSG on the 8th. When you have that wrestling promoter mindset that was ingrained in Vince Jr. from his father and from his father, Jesse McMahon, you may not be open to change. If I was on the books, if I was on the company, I guess I just blew my wad and gave you my suggestions. But I would say, wrestling, WWE fans, you come to us. We're a destination. We're in Orlando. We're in either Las Vegas, wherever. But you've got to come to us instead of us taking our ropes and our rings and our pyro and everything on the road.
Right.
That's when Benny was talking about the money that they made. A lot of that money was because a dollar not spent is a dollar earned. When they weren't going on tour for the whole year and taking all those trucks and all those wrestlers and all the referees across the country, you're saving what, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a show by doing everything in the Thunderdome. So it actually made good money for that. Good sense. Good sense makes good money, right?
Well, I think if I can interject, and then Benny, I'll bounce it off to you. What you were talking about, it's interesting because I like the idea of a central location for 2 reasons. One, the peak of the territory days. Look at the Louisville Garden. Look at the Cow Palace. Look at the Memphis
Mid-South.
Arena.
Yeah.
I mean, you have, what's that, Benny?
Mid-South Coliseum.
Exactly.
Memphis,
You had what were the equivalent of smaller towns, smaller, and cities smaller than Orlando, which was a good destination. Now that you had 5,000-10,000 people every week for years in a row. If you build a local wrestling fan base, you're not going to have especially if you're talking most of your money coming off television contracts. Those tickets could probably be $10 or something like that, And the second thing, I think if the WWE moves to a central location, you're going to see a rise in smaller independent promotions because somebody's going to have to fill the void for the people that can't travel but still want to go see a live wrestling show, which I think is great. But Benny, before I bounce it to you, Mikey, you said something, and I got to get this out there now before we forget. You said if you were in charge, if things change, McMahon, Kevin Dunn, the people that have, you mentioned before, several people involved that have been personally wronged you. If WWE becomes NBC or Disney or something like that, you think maybe new boss, same as the old boss, or would that be something you might look into again?
Well, look, I mean, I appreciate the compliment, Dan, because I love before I die to get a lot of things accomplished, but it's a certain point, and it's not to be cryptic or macabre, but I do have to mention something in a minute. It's a bit of a downer, but every man has a certain amount of time left in their life. And for me, a Distance from Avalon, the book that I wrote, and thanks to Benny for writing a nice review on Amazon. Benny, I'm overdue to say thanks for that. I feel like I have, it's a struggle, Dan, to be honest with you. My struggle every day is, how much time do I put into my YouTube rants about either pro wrestling, which is the majority of them, or Mike's movies reviews, versus how much time do I actually do the research to write the sequel to my book? And so, although it's very tempting to say yes, if the WWE sells to NBC Peacock, I probably will send a resume in to answer your question. But at the same time, if life is short, do I want to be another guy on the, pecking order, low on the totem pole and trying to work my way up the WWE corporate ladder? Or do I want to be a guy who writes his own novels, makes his own movies, and tries to make his own mark in the world? And I don't say that I have the answer to that this minute. WWE and NWA wrestling especially has been a big part of my life. But at some point, you take a gut check and you're like, man, I'm a grown man. And if I have creative energy, what always makes me feel best is when I make a film on my own, or when I write a story or a script on my own, or when I do something that has nothing to do with wrestling, because there's so much compromise in pro wrestling. And to be quite honest, some of the wrestlers are cool guys. Brian Pillman Jr. was a cool guy, and he kind of endorsed my book. But some of them are just egomaniacal children. And if you've ever hung out with a pro wrestler, guess who's paying for lunch? Usually not the pro wrestler, right? So to me, to answer your question, Dan, I am fascinated by it. But I also, to be honest, when I started being the angry wrestling fan, which is not even, it was just a manifestation of how I felt, I kind of knew that I was getting myself blackballed, because the truth that I tell, which I basically look into the camera and I say, if this crap is crap, don't watch it.
Right.
Other people in the wrestling community, whether it's my friend Joe Cronin or whoever else, they'll tell you how bad the WWE is, but none of them will go so far as to say, don't watch it. Well, I'll go that far. I'll say we're wasting our times. I started #RawProtest because I do feel that there is so much intelligence and passion with pro wrestling fans, and I wonder if that passion and intelligence is wasted on WWE.
Benny, what you thinking?
Well, along the lines of Mike being hired by the new owner, and just say he immediately gets promoted, which I think would be a great thing, to the Czar of Professional Wrestling. Mikey Messier is the Czar of Professional Wrestling. And I did a little bit of research, and for the Memorial Day Raw, 1,557,000 viewers. For the SmackDown after Memorial Day, 1,792,000 viewers. And contrast that to the Memorial Day Raw and the Memorial Day Nitro of 1997. Nitro, 3,960,000 viewers. Raw, 3,240,000 viewers. The last WrestleMania on pay-per-view that had over 1 million buys was 1991. By 2015, it was down to 259,000 buys for WrestleMania. WrestleMania 3 had over 4 million buys. So I guess my question is, Mike, is it even possible? And I keep in mind, 1997, people could go to house shows, in their hometown. That wasn't a possibility now.
Anybody, I'm sorry to cut you off for a second, Benny, but anybody who grew up or was a fan in the 90s, the Monday Night Wars in that era, it wasn't unheard. It wasn't unheard of to a random Thursday WCW WWF house show to have 20,000 people.
Yeah. So my question is, will that ever happen again? What would have to happen for people to love wrestling that much again? Which in my heart, I know how much I love wrestling. I know how much, Dan loves wrestling and you love wrestling. There's got to be a lot of people out there that still love wrestling like that. What could happen to make people love wrestling where the attendance is and viewership is gets close to those numbers again?
I'll give you a 2-word answer, and then I'll give you another 2-word answer. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Hogan, Piper, Austin, Rock. You get your top babyface, you shine them up real good. You get your top heel, you make them dirty and nasty and creepy, and repeat. And that's all you got to do. And here's what we've been hearing for years. Not just the three of us, but others have talked about this. Vince McMahon or Triple H or Stephanie or whoever have not allowed some of the talents to take off. Daniel Bryan is a great example, and there's been other great examples. Even guys that could have been something and were let go. Matt Cardona, woo woo woo, right? That guy,
right?
Right. And who was the guy who won the Money in the Bank briefcase, the genius with the blue robe?
You're talking about Damien Sandow.
Right. Now, Damien Sandow, Aaron Stevens,
mm-hmm.
he was getting over being the stunt double for The Miz.
The Miz.
Yeah,
that was
Damien Mizdow. Even his Macho Mizdow gimmick, I mean, everything he did, the crowd absolutely loved. But, Mikey, and you've seen it, Benny, you've seen it. We've talked about it on the show before. I would say only really maybe the last 10, 15 years, because I don't remember it happening in the 90s or the 2000s, where at some point the WWE decided we are never going to let anyone get over on their own again. And if you do, Zack Ryder being a great example, he was arguably, merch mover. Rusev Day is another great example where not only are we not going to let you get over on your own, we are going to do everything we can to destroy you on television.
Punish you.
And tell so the fans know, don't you dare cheer for anybody we don't push for you. And right around that era, when that attitude took over, is when the ratings started to go down.
You got it. And here's the thing. And look, I've said this before, and it's not a unique thought to me, but I have to feel that Vincent Kennedy McMahon, the one opponent that he can't beat is time, and health catches up to all of us, and the mind deteriorates. And I'm not picking on Vince. I'm just saying that I think that's a possible explanation, that although he's able to wake up in the morning and function and even run a business, some of his decisions, whether it's just the old man yells at the clouds, or if there really is, you know what I mean?
If I get that reference.
Right. Grandpa Simpson yelling at the clouds, or if it's just being out of touch, or literally having some type of aging condition, which I'm not wishing upon him. I'm speculating, once again, all opinion, no facts. But I just question if that's not a part of it. And I'm not trying to pick on Vince. I'm just saying that if you're a 75-year-old guy trying to deal with what do I do with Shayna Baszler, you know what I mean, or what do I do with this Alexa Bliss? I just don't know if Vince is the guy to do that, which makes this whole Khan thing interesting. Nick Khan,
wait
interesting.
A minute. Benny, you said you don't know if Vince McMahon knows how to handle Shayna Baszler. Are you telling me that having a legit mixed martial artist and tough girl who the crowd is behind being a tough girl lose a feud to a puppet isn't the right idea? I mean, I saw her run away from a magic puppet on Monday. That has to be the right move for a former MMA champion.
I haven't seen Monday yet, but I saw last week when you had a match. There was an intergender match, so you have Shayna Baszler, who, like, to me, is a killing machine, against an acrobat from Cirque du Soleil, and she loses to the acrobat from Cirque du Soleil. She gets pinned, and then he's on the Alexa's show. She beats him down, and then she proceeds to get heat with the puppet. I'm thinking, like, what the hell?
Just wait. I guarantee you, if they don't change leadership, Alexa Bliss and that damn puppet are going to be women's tag team champions before the end of the year.
Well, I mean, then that goes back to Nicholas and Braun Strowman, and it's just it really is tough, guys. To be honest with you, I was at the coffee house last night where I spend a lot of time, and the cable that I have is YouTube TV, so I'm able to watch cable pretty much anywhere that has Wi-Fi. And so I was kind of just doing my thing on social media. I was tweaking some of my YouTube videos, and I said, watching the hockey game, and then I'm like, you know what? Let me. I know that I'm not a Raw watcher really, but I'm like, let me just peek in, see what's going on. I peek into Raw, and it's a tag team battle royal, and they're rolling Miz out in a wheelchair, and John Morrison's yapping away, and then AJ Styles comes out with his 7-foot tall guy, and guys, I was assuming, but I didn't know that somehow Randy Orton and RVD Jr. were going to win this tag team battle royal. But then I really had a moment. I literally didn't get to the 90-second mark of watching this stuff. And I said, what am I doing with my life? How can I watch this? And I just went back to the hockey game and went back to YouTube videos and just went back into a different form of entertainment. And guys, I'm telling you, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you'd say, hey, Mike, you would tune into 90 seconds of Monday Night Raw and then turn away in pure apathy, I'd call you a liar. I'd say, of course not. I got to see who's CM Punk wrestling, or what's this DX 2006. What are they up to? Or what's Randy Orton or Batista doing tonight? Like, even post-Attitude Era, I was still pretty into wrestling. And I was going to get into that with this shirt, that I'm wearing tonight, this Triple H shirt and this action figure of Triple H. I believe it was it the 2005? His little crown has fallen off. It's somewhere in here. But this is that
was his King of Kings toy.
Yeah, I'd play the song because it still plays the Motorhead song, but I don't want the copyright claim going to Motorhead. Yeah. So, but my point is, I still liked WWE quite a bit after the Attitude Era. We're talking, whatever they called it, Ruthless Aggression Era. I think of it as more of the ECW era. Like, there was just like that 2005, 2007, when their reboot of ECW was actually pretty good. And they had a couple of years where they had like Big Show and Ric Flair fighting in thumbtacks. And they had this gorgeous young Kelly. And they had all these kind of edgier things going on. For me, Dan, I know what you mentioned as kind of the downfall of the decline creatively of WWE. For me, it was two things. I illustrate two things. One was the Chris Benoit incident. We don't have to go into the whole rabbit hole of that, but I think the Chris Benoit death, whatever you want to call it, murder, suicide, setup, whatever your speculation, but the Chris Benoit death and the unfortunate death of his son and his wife, Nancy Benoit, who's actually a great wrestler personality, a woman, great manager. Mm-hmm. That was a big turning point. And I think right on the heels of that was Linda McMahon running for some type of office in Connecticut.
Yeah, she ran for the Senate.
Yeah, she ran for Senate. And so then suddenly, I think it was right before a WrestleMania, the WrestleMania with Triple H and Randy Orton, supposed to have this big grudge match main event. And they were told that day, hey, guys, you got to calm it down because we're PG now. And whatever year that was, if it was 2008 or whatever it was. But I think those two things, the Benoit situation and the Linda runs for office, we have to go to PG. To me, that was the double whammy that took the WWE creatively, really got hampered at that point.
Well, let me ask you something, Benny. As a money man, one of the moments that's often pointed to as kind of the jump the shark moment, if you will, or the beginning of the end, was when the WWE became a publicly traded company. At that point, now they had shareholders. When you become publicly traded, and you mentioned in the financials, they spent three times? They had 3 times 300 and some million in shareholder buybacks, and you see that all the time with and I'm not trying to get any political or economic rants or anything, but like pharmaceutical companies and banks and some of these big corporations, they spend more money on buybacks and shareholder investments than they do on product. And at that, when the WWE became publicly traded, their goal was no longer to produce good wrestling. It was to make money for the shareholders. And you could start to see, like Benny said, there no more risks. PG. We got to every show was just loaded with Michael Cole turning the Mountain Dew bottle just right, and we had that back when I was a kid. The pay-per-view brought to you by Snickers or whatever, but now there's 10, 12 references. Just a couple? Was it a couple months ago? The Old Spice guy during the Old Spice commercial won the 24/7 title.
Right? Yeah.
And now isn't that Rick Boogs on SmackDown? The Elias 2.0. So, you've got, they became corporate. And so, Benny, I'll start with you, the money man, and then we'll bounce over to Mikey. You have these moments, these jump the shark moments where it's like, okay, that's the beginning of the end. Do you think if they were to be bought out lock, stock, and barrel, as they would be, would you continue to diversify that way? Or is this become... do you go back to being just part of something?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, because I did have a question, for Mike, as far as if it was sold, would the new owner just maintain the status quo? But I also had something written down that it's very, it could take up 3 shows by itself. My opinion is that I don't think wrestling was meant to be national. I think the whole business model of wrestling as it is now is very flawed. You go back to the territory days, and an Ox Baker wrestled in, the WWA in Indianapolis for 4 or 5 months. And then, people kind of in the beginning, people were very interested. And then when interest started to wane a little bit, then he'd go down to Texas and wrestle somewhere else. And, somebody from Texas maybe, or California, would go into the WWA, and the fans were constantly interested because there was always a new feud. And now we have all these wrestlers signed to these long-term contracts. And I've been watching Randy Orton now since 2003, and no knock against Randy Orton, but how much more could he do? And we get used to seeing these same people, month after month, year after year. I don't think wrestling was meant to be that way. I think wrestling was meant to be how we used to see it. And I know it's never going to happen again, but I think wrestling is meant to be Ricky Steamboat wrestles in Mid-Atlantic, and then he goes up to WWF, and then maybe he goes down to Championship Wrestling from Georgia, and every time he moves, people are glad to see him. Nobody's getting tired of him.
Don't forget too, Benny, and Mikey is a perfect segue to your thoughts on this, is regions have tastes. Sure. Black Saturday, the Georgia fans, the Memphis fans, the Kentucky. You mentioned somebody. Vince McMahon Senior in the WWF when it was in the Northeast, they had talent that wouldn't sell in Texas or in Oklahoma, in Georgia. Same way that some of these Georgia wrestlers and these Southern boys couldn't go out to California and sell out, because that's just not what the local fans wanted. So what do you think, man? You think he's right? Do you think maybe wrestling just drained itself out because it was never meant to be national for so long?
This is for me now?
Yes. I'm sorry, I said Benny. Mikey, I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. Here's my thought, and just to illustrate your point, Dan, Chief Jay Strongbow was over huge. Our buddy Nikita Brezhnev and Evan Ginsberg still refer to him as Chief, even though Chief Jay Strongbow, as most of us know by now,
he's an Italian guy.
He's an Italian guy, right? He's Italian American who made his living selling us the thought that he was the Chief Wahoo McDaniel. And Chief Wahoo McDaniel worked in the Northeast. He worked at the Capitol Center of the Landover, Maryland. He worked in MSG. He wouldn't have worked in the Atlanta's Omni, where they were used to the real Chief Wahoo McDaniel. Mr. Wrestling 2 worked quite well in the Atlanta Omni, but Mr. Wrestling 2 probably wouldn't have gotten over for an extended period of time in the Northeast. right? So there you go. That's a nice illustration of your point, Dan. Different guys worked better in different regions. Here's the thing, which I do appreciate Benny's point of, is this current wrestling setup just so far from what it should have been? Well, perhaps, and I would probably feel that way too. However, uh, the genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in. Robin
Right.
Williams is running around crazy as Aladdin, and we can't get him back in the bottle, right? Shout out to Robin Williams.
Can't unring that bell, huh?
No. And so here's the thing, and this is, I find myself, guys, believe it or not, wondering if I was an 18-year-old or 25-year-old Mike Messier, or even a 12-year-old Mike Messier, what would I think of the angry wrestling fan Mike Messier? I'd probably hate his guts, because as a modern fan, I sometimes expect or hope that these fans would go and find old Pro Wrestling Illustrateds and watch all the great stuff that's on either the Peacock Wrestling Network or YouTube or whatever, and watch Starrcade 83 or Starrcade 85, or watch Vern Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel wrestle to a 60-minute Broadway in the middle of Minnesota. I would like for these fans to do that, these guys in their 20s and teens or 30s. The reality is they don't have much of an interest in doing that. They just don't.
Right.
They want to see, what is Alexa Bliss going to do, or what is Serena Deeb going to do, or what is Kenny Omega going to do. They want to watch what's contemporary to them. So for us to put our old school traditional pro wrestling fan values on the 2021 product, in a sense, it's not fair, because when we were young wrestling fans, whatever our age happened to be respectively, we were more interested in what was going on at that moment than digging up some wrestling magazine from 10 or 15 years earlier. You know what I mean? So as wrestling fans, as older wrestling fans or experienced wrestling fans, veteran wrestling fans, you might say, we have to acknowledge that what's contemporary is always going to be where the business is going. We might say, and we were probably right, that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago was better. You had all these different territories. They worked that crowd. The ticket prices were lower. You had a weekly show at the Atlanta's Omni. I mean, can you imagine going to the Omni 4 times in a month in 1982 and seeing Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer beat the hell out of each other?
Every Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, seeing Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee.
Yeah.
How great would that be? How great would it be to be in 1982 and see David, Kerry, and Kevin versus Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts in any fathomable combination? But the thing is, guys, we have to deal with what's going on today. And for my part, I've had a pretty good run as a wrestling fan since February, because I've been going to the AEW shows, the Dynamites, and I'm actually pretty friendly with the guy who's running the ticket office, and I have my seat that I like, and I've been able to go to many shows. I mean, I went to a show last Friday. I went to Blood and Guts. I went to the pay-per-view. I went to the Fan Fest. I was there when Tyson was there. I was there when Shaq was there. I mean, these are like some pretty big moments in AEW in the short history that they've had, and I've pretty much been at all of them since February. So for me, in a selfish way, this whole worldwide situation, I don't even want to say the word, because apparently your videos get demonetized if you even say the dreaded C word, so I won't say it. Please don't say it. But for me, it's been kind of interesting, because I've had a pretty good run as a wrestling fan. And can I compare these moments to going to the Crockett Cup in 1987 and seeing, 25 or 30 wrestling matches over 2 days, seeing Nikita Koloff and Dusty Rhodes and Tully Blanchard and Lex Luger have this big epic tag team tournament final, and Magnum TA coming out? It's an apple and an orange, and I would probably prefer to be, that age again and seeing Magnum TA coming out after his Porsche accident and walking, like, to me, that will always rank in kind of an impeccable spot. But for the young fan today, he goes and he sees Blood and Guts and sees a 2-cage crazy thing and Chris Jericho flying off the top. And he's more forgiving that, Chris Jericho landed on a bunch of cushions instead of really a hard canvas or whatever. that's just my point. I guess it's just an age thing. We're getting older, and we just have to realize that.
Well, now, counterpoint is as we wrap up here, since we have just a few minutes left. You talk about the direction of the business is what the young people want to see, but I look at music, film. Oftentimes the leaders are what drives the product. I mean, do you think it's possible, and just kind of a narrative, if you were to say, I don't know, take someone like a Jim Cornette, or somebody, say, one of the old school bookers, and give them the modern product and tell them, look, young bucks, I don't want to see 200 super kicks in your match. I don't want to see any more suicide dives. I don't want to see any more spots where people stand there for 2 minutes while somebody climbs the cage and they're obviously all working together. I want to see 60-minute Broadways. I want to, Kenny Omega, you have to learn how to do a damn knee lift because your knee strikes look terrible. I don't want to see talking puppets or, bad moments. I don't want to see, I don't know, whatever you have going on Raw, or like you said, RVD 2.0. And they start, maybe not overnight, but they start kind of incorporating what worked before. Do you think the modern wrestling fan, the crowd that you go to AEW with, if they watch a match and it looks more like, let's say the Young Bucks against, I don't know, Moxley and what's his name?
Eddie Kingston?
Thank you. Yes, Kingston. If they were to have, the four of them were to have a tag match and it played out more like spot for spot a Midnight Express versus Rock and Roll Express match, or you mentioned earlier the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, do you think the crowd would reject that? Or would you kind of slowly go back to what worked and then maybe start bringing in, like Benny said, some of the fans that want to watch wrestling but just can't stomach what's on TV today?
Well, I got 2 points off your 1 point. The first one is when you first started that, Dan, I was like, oh my God, Dan's been possessed by Bill Watts in 1992 WCW. He's going to change the top rope rule. You can't.
No.
You can't jump off the top rope, and he's gonna get rid of these pesky mats at ringside. So
and we're bringing back rounds.
Right, when Kenny Omega does a tope suicida, he better nail somebody, otherwise he's going to hit the hard concrete instead of a mat. And to be honest, I feel that some of what you said might be viewed as those 1992 or 93 WCW fans felt. What are you doing? Like, why are we having disqualifications if a guy jumps with a flying elbow off the top rope? And so my second thought on that, Dan, was you mentioned, a guy like Jim Cornette. And here's the thing. I was there at Double or Nothing, right? And I think it was a long show. I think there was a total of 10 matches, including the Stadium Stampede match and the Triangle match for the world title with Kenny Omega and those two guys, Orange Cassidy and Pac. It was a long show. It was a fun show. Here's the thing. Being part of the live audience, and it was about 5,000 people in a 5,500 seat venue, so close to a sellout. And it may not have been a sellout due to restrictions. Who knows?
Right.
But the point is, it was a big crowd. Of all the matches on that show, when I left, my initial thought was every match was really good. My least favorite match was probably Miro and Lance Archer. And then I thought a little bit further. I'm like, oh, yeah, but the match that really didn't get over, because I didn't even think of it initially because it was kind of boring, was that Cody a Coco match, or whatever his name is. Agogo. So Agogo and Cody was actually so boring that I even forgot about it when I was thinking, what was the most boring match? It was so boring I couldn't remember it. So here's the thing. I'm listening to Jim Cornette on YouTube, Jim Cornette's drive-thru, and he's just deconstructing the total Double or Nothing show. And he's basically pissing on every single match except for Cody and Agogo. So, basically, Cornette's putting over that match. And the co-host, Brian Last, the great Brian Last, is respectfully disagreeing, but allowing Cornette to go on and on about how Agogo was great and Cody might have let him win and all this stuff. And Ogogo is the only guy in AEW of these young guys who seems to have any potential and know what he's doing, and he seems legitimate. And I'm basically thinking, okay, here's an example, and I like Jim Cornette's rants. I mean, his rants are part of the inspiration for my rants. But when I'm listening to Jim, I'm basically thinking this is an example of Jim Cornette being out of touch. The audience, the live audience, was not responding to Cody and Ogogo. They responded to Serena Deeb and Riho in the dark match, like the match before the actual show. They responded very much to, like you said, the Young Bucks and Kingston and Moxley, and that was only the second match on the show.
Right.
They responded to Cage versus Page. They got their energy back up for the triple threat, and guess what? People were sitting in their seats to watch the TV, knowing that it was most likely a pre-taped Stadium Stampede. We were sitting in our seats watching that. After 3.5 hours of live wrestling, people are sitting in their seats to watch the TV, and people are moving around like I did because my seat was obstructed. So I go upstairs to the balcony to get a better view of the TV. We were into that show. We were having a great time. For me to then tune on, 3 or 4 days later and listen to Jim Cornette, I couldn't listen to everything he said because I know what I experienced. I had a hell of a good time at Double or Nothing. And I've been to a lot of wrestling shows. I'd put that in my top 10 as far as pro wrestling shows. And we're talking Crockett Cup 87, Barely Legal 97. We're talking some pretty damn good wrestling shows I've been to. And I'm putting that in my top 10. And to listen to Jim Cornette piss on it, it's like, Jim, you're out of touch.
Well, let me ask you something. This will be my final question. And then, Benny, I'll go to you for your final thought. The recent, now granted, it was a late show and they moved around. AEW's had moved to Friday, and it was the lowest rated. It was like 400,000. It was the lowest rated show they've had since they've been on the air. And I'm wondering, and I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying, is there really, they kind of peaked about with Shaq and all them was like 1.1 million. When you talk about, yes, you had fun, you had the crowd. Do you see a Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Orange Cassidy, Pop? Do they, other than the core audience that AEW has that hasn't grown in 2 years, do they bring in new fans, or is that pretty much it? You've got your niche market, and that's it. This
is for me or for Benny?
For you. Final question.
Sure, I can tell you that when I was at Double or Nothing, and this is the first, because I'm at Double or Nothing and I've been spoiled because I've had the whole row to myself of seats, right? Because of the social distancing and the limited seat selling. At Double or Nothing, I got my seat, but I got a whole row full of guys sitting next to me. The row full of guys next to me were from New York. They came to Florida for this show. The guy sitting directly next to me, he was saying he had never seen AEW before, and his friends brought him. So he's getting indoctrinated into AEW, and I'm trying to explain to him who the different guys are. I'm like, I see that Pac guy. He used to be your 205 Live champion. Mm-hmm. See that Moxley. That's Dean Ambrose. I'm trying to, translate some of this stuff to him.
Right.
But he's getting into it, and I could tell he was getting into it because when the show started, he's kind of social media, his way. He's looking at old social media. But once we're getting 3 or 4 matches into it, he's putting his phone down. Mm-hmm. He's cheering. He's saying, "Oh, this is pretty cool," And his boys, his buddies, were all into it from the get-go. So he was kind of the casual fan of the bunch who was kind of getting indoctrinated.
Right.
I can say in my opinion, if I were to work for AEW now, which maybe I'll send them another resume, and maybe it's because when you're rich, you don't always think, how do I have to make money? Like when you're poor or when you're, not rich. Mm-hmm. Well, that venue, Daly's Place, is a great venue for wrestling. Tony Khan and associates should be trying to sell that place out every show. They're not. And what you're getting is that I think more people outside of Jacksonville come to Jacksonville as wrestling fans with AEW as a destination rather than the city of Jacksonville supporting or even knowing that AEW exists. I'm walking around with my wrestling T-shirts. A lot of time it's a Macho Man or an Iron Sheik T-shirt. Some, person will say, "Oh, I used to watch wrestling. I like wrestling." And I'll say, "Oh yeah, you know that there's AEW in town? What's AEW?" This is in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So my point is that I could easily work for AEW and incorporate them into the community because for whatever reason, they're so niche into their niche, they haven't reached out to the city of Jacksonville, which has got a lot of people, and it's the biggest geographic city in the continental U.S. People know we're here, and we're here once or twice a week providing live entertainment. That's pretty damn fun. That's a failure on their part or their marketing, or guess what? When you have that much money, maybe you don't care as much as you should. Right. Meaning Tony Khan himself. And Tony, hey, I'll work for you. I'll get you some butts in seats. That's what it's all about.
I guess no secret there, Benny. The angry wrestling fan has a preferred company. What about, as we wrap up here, Benny, what do you think? It's state of the wrestling business.
Well, I got a last question for Mike, and it's a follow-up. He was on Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast last week with Evan Ginsberg and Buddy Sotelo Esquire. And Evan asked him a question about WWE, like, why do you have to choose between WWE and AEW? And then Mikey did a YouTube rant about, WWE fans making, belittling AEW fans. And I gave that a lot of thought, and I went back in my time machine back to 1968 when, as a 13-year-old kid, all I had was Capital Wrestling on Channel 47, UHF, which I watched on my 12-inch Hitachi black and white TV set. Now, fast forward a couple of years later, there was a UHF channel out of Paterson, New Jersey, that started carrying wrestling from the Olympic. About 3 or 4 years later, I got Championship Wrestling from Florida. And after that was WC. And every time I got a new show, I thought, holy shit, more wrestling. I mean, I couldn't get enough of it. There was WCCW, I think for a while, Southwest Championship Wrestling. In the mid-'80s, I got AWA. It's like I could not get enough of this stuff. And the thought never came to me is, well, wait a minute, like, I'm a WWF fan. Like, I can't like this stuff. To me, it was the more the merrier. But I do agree that at this point, there is a polarization. And I'm going to give my theory, and then I'm going to ask Mikey for his theory. My theory is now, at least AEW is trying to make an effort. And I guess backtracking, the one thing all those territories had in common back then was every single one of them was trying to put on a good show, quality wrestling, so that people would buy tickets to the next show.
Right.
Now, I think the difference now is, WWE is whatever that product is. It's not wrestling anymore, where at least AEW, there is a semblance of wrestling involved. So I want to get Mikey's take on that.
Why do the fans go at each other? Is that the question?
Why do you have to choose one or the other?
You don't have to.
No, but I mean, why do people choose one or the other?
I think it's we cheer for laundry. Why don't people cheer for every football team in the league? We know that the players have no loyalty to anything other than their money. I mean, no player, for the most part. There's always exceptions. Baseball, basketball, with the exception of LeBron James going back to Cleveland. But for the most part, the professional sports people, athletes, choose teams based on who's going to pay them the most money. Right. We as fans, typically, and there's exceptions, we cheer for the team that's in our hometown, or maybe like there's Rhode Islanders who cheer for the New York Yankees because the generation before them were Italian-American Yankee fans. Like my dad was a Yankees fan, right? But he grew up close to the Red Sox. So there's reasons that fans cheer for laundry. For wrestling, my theory, guys, is that there has been a lack of conflict on the screen. Part of it is people like, not her fault, but Renee Young, for all her 5 or 6 or 7 years as one of the top people in WWE, she had a very calming presence, almost diffusing conflict. Why do you want to wrestle your friend? Why did you turn on Seth Rollins? Why did you beat your friend up with a chair? And just kind of this feminization of the product.
High school guidance counselor almost.
Well, that's how Renee Young to me came across in her interview segments. She was always kind of nullifying the conflict. Why are you guys fighting? Well, Renee, this is wrestling. It's supposed to be fighting. Me and Gene Okerlund and others would spike the conflict, meaning that they would add to it. Well, oh, I can't believe it. Magnificent Morocco, you choked Ricky Steamboat. So my point is, a society that's becoming more politically correct, no one wants to offend anyone, comedians can't tell jokes out of context and so forth. Pro wrestling is in a tough spot because wrestling is supposed to be the Mavericks, the Bruiser Brodies, the crazy people of society have something to do, which is to be a pro wrestler. But if you're going to cut the metaphorical balls off of everybody, and everyone's got to be nice, and you're doing things like the Facebook Intergender Wrestling Challenge tournament, and you're putting a high value on Ms. and Mrs. reality show, and you're, I'm not saying feminization in a bad way, but maybe that's the wrong word, but you're softening the rough edges of pro wrestling, especially in WWE. That lack of conflict doesn't make the audience seek less conflict. We create it amongst ourselves. So for me, when I'm the angry wrestling fan and I'm taking heat and people are criticizing me and saying, "Oh my God, it's Jack Black has let himself go," and whatever they're saying about me, I don't care, because at least I'm providing some testosterone to these fans.
You're getting the heat that the wrestlers should have been getting.
Yeah, because you got it. Because I'm taking a mirror to this thing called professional wrestling and to the fans and pointing it at them and saying, "Hey guys, what have they done to our sport?" You know what I mean? And for me, there's a certain victory in that. And actually, guys, I did want to mention that, unfortunately, and I know we're going in OT here. Unfortunately for me, this morning I found out that a friend of mine. He's I'll call him a friend, a good guy, a guy named Mickey Gilmore, a New England actor, passed away apparently on Friday, and Mickey was only, I believe, 53 years old. The only good side is he seemed to pass away peacefully in his sleep, but it was very sudden, and a lot of people in New England that might be watching this, if they've gotten this far in the video, are very upset about it, and so I'll give a shout out to Mickey. He was a good guy. And oddly enough, Mickey just had an acting role in a movie with George Clooney and Ben Affleck, apparently. So apparently, whenever this movie comes out, it might come out. It was just filmed 2 or 3 months ago, so the movie may not be out for 6 months or a year. But apparently, Mickey was featured in some type of recurring secondary role or something. But Mickey was just really happy about that. And really happy to get like 2 works a month, 2 months of work on this film. And I think he did have some lines from what I haven't seen the movie, obviously, you know what I mean? So I don't even know the title of it, but apparently Mickey was featured in it, and he was so happy, so proud to get that break in acting. And unfortunately, as I think Jeff Jarrett says, the great Weaver, we just don't know what's ahead of us, right? So I did want to say a shout out to Mickey. I could be wrong, but I think Mickey was kind of like an old school Hulk Hogan fan of that mid '80s era. I don't want to put words into his mouth or anything, but I just want to send a shout out, because when we talk about all these things, guys, it's easy to get caught up in these things, but at the end of the day, we all have to construct our own lives and do things that are good for us. You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. And that is good words to end on. Do what's best for us. And if that means loving multiple shows, great. If that means, Mikey, as you say, turn your TV off and send a message, then do what's best for you.
Buy my book while you're at it. That's always good for business.
I was just about to say, Mikey, your book is on Amazon. Benny Scala has a great review there, A Distance from Avalon. Mikey Messier, Benny, we're pushing along. Dan and Benny in the Ring Facebook page. We're at, I think, 630 something now. 635. And so we'll continue the cross promotion. Mikey, always a pleasure having you on. I know, one question, today we could have done a dozen shows on some of the questions we talked about, but state of the business is what it is, and we'll see. We had a lot of news. I know, just unrelated side note, that I think it was Jackson Riker is his name. He was just released yesterday, the day after his birthday. And on Raw, he won his match against Elias. So it looked like he was going to, because they split that tag team up. It looked like Riker was going to be the one they pushed.
Well, he defeated AJ Styles as well, like the week before.
It looked like Riker was the one they were pushing. He's gone. Aleister Black last week on SmackDown comes out, kicks Big E Langston in the face just Big E after the multi-man Intercontinental match or 2 weeks ago. So they were building him up, and we'll see where it goes. And honestly, I don't think they're done purging talent or office staff. So maybe in a couple weeks we'll have another conversation to see where it's going. So again, gentlemen, always a great talk. Mikey, again, fan of the show, friend of the show. I'm a huge fan, so it's always a pleasure having you. For award-winning filmmaker Mikey Messier, for Benny Scala, I'm Dan Sebastiano. The book is A Distance from Avalon. Buy it on Amazon. Read the great reviews. So,
Dan, can I say one more thing, buddy?
Absolutely, go for it.
I wanted, this is just a point I gotta say this. I think that this, it's Nick Khan, right? Nick Khan,
yes.
I think there is kind of an upside for bringing him in and giving him so much power in this company. And I'll tell you what, when we're talking about that, like, oh my God, they just had Aleister Black, kick Big E in the face, and they just had this Riker guy, Jason Riker beat AJ Styles. Wrestling people, any of the three of us, or Vince McMahon, or Triple H, or Stephanie, who knows, it wouldn't seem logical to them to fire a guy who just beat AJ Styles, right?
Right.
You got one of your top guys, if not your top guy, performance-wise, AJ Styles. He's 41, he's 42, whatever. But if you have someone beat him, logically, in a wrestling person's mind, you got to keep that guy. He's a hot hand. You just had Aleister Black. You've been toying around this guy for 2 or 3 years. You don't know what to do with him. You're tweaking his character. You put him in there. He kicks Big E in the face. They're going to have a U.S. title program, and maybe Aleister Black gets the U.S. title, and maybe he finally catches fire, and we can do something with this guy. For wrestling people, whether it's fan, a promoter, owner, whatever, you wouldn't fire those two guys, right? Mm-hmm. But for this Khan guy, if he's a businessman first and a wrestling guy second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, he looks at the figures. He looks at the numbers. We're paying Aleister Black, just making up a number, $750,000 a year. He's bringing us, $10,000 in T-shirts a quarter. Well, this seems like a bad choice, a bad contract. He's gone. This Riker guy is what, 27, 28? He's been here for 3 or 4 years. He hasn't done much. He's not a great talker. He's gone. This Braun Strowman, you're giving him what, a $1,200,000 downside guarantee?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And you've basically we've made him kind of a guy who loses a lot of big matches, and he's kind of charismatic, but he's kind of not. Gone. But we'll give him. We'll see in a couple of years. My point is that I don't know anything about this Khan guy. Like, I'm not a fan of his or whatever. But sometimes, as a wrestling person, my theory here is, if you want to do, quote, what's best for business, you bring in a business guy, because he makes these tough decisions that the wrestling people are afraid to do. We can't fire Braun. We put so much into him. Khan doesn't see it that way. He says, this guy's not bringing in the money that we're spending on him. Gone.
Right.
I don't care if he's got a good attitude, a bad attitude. I don't care that we called him. He was headed home because he wasn't booked for WrestleMania. Roman Reigns dropped out. We called him, and he turned his truck around and came back and beat Goldberg at WrestleMania for us. Khan has no loyalty to this, right? And it doesn't have to be Khan. It could be anybody. He has no loyalty to wrestling stuff. So that makes him, like an assassin, like a business assassin. I'm gonna cut the fat. And from a business point of view, I've never run a company like this. I see the value in that. The other thing I want to jump on, because we kind of glossed over it, if WWE does get sold to NBC Universal, that's the same Universal of Universal Studios, right?
Correct.
Universal Studios, I believe, has 3 theme parks in their theme. That's the big thing here in Florida. Every theme park has to have more than 1 theme park. Yeah. So Disney has 4 theme parks. You don't just go to Disney World. You have to choose. Am I going to Magic Kingdom? Am I going to Hollywood Studios? Am I going to Epcot? Or am I going to Animal Kingdom? Universal had 2 for years. Now I think they have 3 because they have a water park. Couldn't you see Wrestle Park? The Undertaker's Haunted Mansion, the Rock's, SmackDown roller coaster. I mean, if NBC Universal is looking to add a park, I talked about the Hall of Fame for WWE. You can have a whole WWE park. You got your roller coasters, you got your this, and you got your 10,000 or 15,000 seat arena in the amusement park, and your Hall of Fame in the amusement park.
You got a restaurant with continuous loops of WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Right, and you could dig up all the things that they were doing with the world from the 2000s era, which was fun. I mean, I never went there, but you could see that they had the model shows, like Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson were doing stuff, and the Big Show was hosting the WrestleMania at the World. All that energy that kind of got wasted because apparently the rent was too high. You could put that into one giant crazy wrestle park, and if NBC Universal owns it, it could be Orlando, could be your destination city for your wrestling.
Well, like I said,
I like that.
Disney, you got California and Florida both have huge amusement park facilities. So, maybe we'll, if it goes to ABC Disney, we can phase out Frontierland and it can be WrestleLand or whatever. But like I said before your final thoughts, it's interesting to see where the business is going, and we definitely have a couple weeks ahead of us. Next week, Benny and I will be doing our prediction show for Hell in a Cell. That's one of those pay-per-views that, barring a disqualification finish like they had with The Fiend and Seth Rollins a few years ago, even with crappy builds, it's somehow always a bunch of good matches. So I look forward to that. So as I said, for filmmaker and author Mike Messier, for Benny Scala, I'm Dan Sebastiano. As always, have a great night, everyone, and as always, happy wrestling.
Night, folks.